A Book of Hours is a particular type of medieval prayer book. It originally started in the High Middle Ages within a monastic context, so it would have been used by monks and nuns in their daily prayer rituals. And then it eventually made its way into a secular context to be used by laymen and women. And it's called a Book of Hours because it contains prayers to the Virgin Mary to be said at certain hours of the day. So the contents of a Book of Hours, to a large degree, are fairly standardized, although you do get some degree of personalization in terms of individual prayers to the Virgin Mary, or perhaps individual prayers to particular saints that were of special significance to whoever owned the Book of Hours. The Cobden Book of Hours is, in my experience, quite special. It's quite a beautiful specimen in terms of a Book of Hours. It's early 15th century French, so it's produced in Troyes, or Troyes, which is in the northeastern region of France, quite near Paris, also quite near what was then the Duchy of Burgundy, and there was quite a lot of cultural and artistic exchange between France and the Duchy of Burgundy, which is now Belgium and the Netherlands. So you see a lot of similar artistic patterns and styles between manuscripts produced in this region. So the Cobden Book of Hours was produced early 15th century in France. I don't believe that we know who the artist was, but it would have been produced within that milieu, and it's kind of a very fine example of the sort of artistry that was being produced in that time. What's particularly interesting, at least to me, about the Cobden Book of Hours are the grotesques or drolleries in the margins of many, not all, but many of the folios. A grotesque or a drollery is a sort of hybrid, maybe half human, half animal, or completely fantastical made-up form. So you'll have maybe a man's head poking out of a snail shell, or you'll have a man's head on a very long, almost giraffe-like neck connected to the hind end of a goat or something like that. They're quite ingenious and they're very colorful. Some of the colors are almost neon, which is quite unusual for that time. And sometimes they look out at the viewer, sometimes they're looking at the text, and they served a purpose almost. They're decorative, but they're also occasionally have maybe a mnemonic purpose to sort of stick in the mind so that you can remember, oh yes, that prayer that I wanted is on the page with the little guy sticking his head out of the snail shell. The kind of person who would have owned a Book of Hours would have been fairly well off. In the case of the Cobden Book of Hours, probably not aristocratic, but they certainly would have been able to afford a very expensive and well-produced Book of Hours. So maybe a member of the landed gentry or minor nobility, something like that. I don't believe we know exactly who owned the Book of Hours to start with. There's a very intriguing aspect, to me at least it's very intriguing. In some of the marginalia there are fleur-de-lis patterns, and most have little daisies or marguerites in them, which to me at least raises the possibility, we can't know for sure, that it might have at some point belonged to a woman named Marguerite or Margaret. And there certainly is a prayer to Saint Margaret of Antioch. It's a pity that it's so understudied, because it is a very fine example of 15th century French manuscript production, and it is an almost complete example. And so it is a fantastic opportunity to look at a whole complete manuscript and figure out who it belonged to, how they would have interacted with it, what it meant to them. And it is a very fine example of late medieval French manuscript artistry as well. So I hope that it becomes an object of further and more detailed study.